Hi and welcome to our channel. My name is Musa and I'm part of the content team at Amateur Photographer. I'm here with Andy, our technical editor, and we're having a first look at the Nikon Zf that's just been released. So Andy, what do you think of this camera? What is it and where does it sit on the Nikon lineup?
Thanks, Musa. So yes, this is the brand new Nikon Zf and it is the firm's latest full-frame mirrorless camera. And unlike all of the previous ones in the full-frame range, this is now retro-styled. It's got top plate dials to control shutter speed, ISO and exposure compensation, and it's just built to look like a beautiful old-fashioned 35mm SLR.
So on the range of Nikon bodies that we have right now, where does this sit?
So basically this is a full-frame version of the Nikon Zf, which is a DX format, APS-C format camera, and it just means this is a higher level, it's a more serious camera. And it kind of sits roughly level with this, which is the Nikon Z6 II. And it shares a lot in common with it, but it's also got a lot of new technology built in. And obviously it's a completely different style.
Okay, we'll come back to like a full comparison, but I want to know, what are the core features of this new body?
So it's got a 24 megapixel full frame sensor. This provides an ISO range up to 64,000. It can shoot at up to about 8 frames a second, and it'll record 4K video at 30 frames per second using the full sensor width, or at 60 frames per second using a DX crop. It'll also do 120 frames per second full HD.
So in comparison with the Z6 II, what are the key differences?
So this is a couple of years newer, obviously, and that means it's got a bunch of updates compared to the Z6 II. So it has the same processor as the flagship Z8 and Z9, and that means you've got subject detection autofocus on board. This means the camera can recognize humans, animals, vehicles, and pick them out and track focus on them as they move around the frame. And that's a really useful update to have. It just makes your life so much easier when you're shooting, because you can just let the camera look after the focusing while you concentrate on composition.
Andy, you mentioned that it shares the same processor as the Z8 and the Z9. Are there any other new features that are new to Nikon or new at all?
So yeah, there's a couple of interesting new features on here. So first of all, this is the first Nikon camera to have a pixel shift multi-shot mode. And that allows you to produce images with various combinations of better pixel level color accuracy, higher resolution or lower noise. And you've got a choice of 4, 8, 16 or even 32 shot modes on here. It's a feature that always sounds really good on a spec sheet, but it's a little bit less practical in real world. You probably can only use it for still life shots effectively. You also have a first on here, which is subject detection can be used in manual focus mode. Okay. So if you're using a manual lens and you want to magnify in onto the subject, actually the camera will just keep track of that subject and automatically zoom in on what you want to see. And that is very new, that's very clever. It also has a brand new feature in the image stabilisation, built-in vibration reduction, where you can link it to the focus point. And that could allow better stabilisation at very long exposures with off-center subjects. We'll have to see how it works in practice.
I mean, it sounds really good for people who already have old lenses that they would love to use on this body. So.
Yes, I think if you are a Nikon lover who's got a bunch of old F-mount lenses, you can put them on here with the FTZ adapter, and it will just be a beautiful vehicle for working with those lenses. And you get all of these latest features. You'll get high-speed shooting, high ISO, subject detection, but still that classic lens feel.
When I looked at the body earlier, I noticed that it has this new feature where you have the black and white option right next to your stills and your movie option.
Yes, and that's a very cute little feature, which again shows how it's tailored towards still photographers. You have this third position on that dial, you've got a stills position, you've got a movie position, and you've got black and white. And that also gives you a choice of 3 different black and white color renditions, One of them is a standard, there's another one which is a bit more neutral in tonality, and then there's a high contrast one which Nikon says looks rather like using a red filter. And that just gives you, at the flick of a switch, that creative option to just go and shoot in black and white. And of course it's all previewed in black and white in the viewfinder, which means you've got a much better way of visualizing the picture you're going to see.
When we look at the body, Andy, there is something that I've noticed that stands out from this body, and that it has a flip-out screen. Is this something that's a new exciting feature for people who use Nikon?
So it's not the first Nikon camera to have that. So the APS-C cameras have had this type of fully articulated screen for a while, but it's the first Nikon full-frame body to have it. So the older Z6 and Z7 bodies just have a tilting screen, which is fine until you turn the camera to portrait format, and then it just stops being useful. The Z8 and the Z9 have a three-way tilt screen, but they can't face forwards. And the advantage of this is that you can just tilt it at any angle. You can set it facing forwards, which is nice if you want to take selfies, or if you're a vlogger who wants to record yourself. And of course, you can also just make this work for high or low angle shooting, regardless of whether you're shooting in landscape or portrait format. So it's a nice addition. Some photographers love it, others don't like it so much, but I think it's a really good choice on here.
And what would you say are the main drawbacks of this new body?
So probably the biggest issue with it is when you come to change the aperture. On a conventional film SLR, a nice old-fashioned film camera, you would have a ring on the lens. And that just gave a very tactile shooting experience, something that a lot of enthusiast photographers will be very familiar with. You don't have that on this camera. Instead, by default, you're changing the aperture just using this dial on the front of the camera body. And that means that when you got the camera up to your eye, it's really just like any other camera. You can, with a lot of Nikon lenses, use a control dial on the lens itself and use that to change the aperture. But if you've got certain lenses, like this 40mm f2, which is going to be one of the kit lenses, you end up having to use the focus ring. And none of Nikon's lens dials are clicked, so again, that just slightly changes the experience. Makes it a little bit less that classic feel.
So Andy, let's talk batteries and memory. What does this new body have?
So what we've got on the ZF is the same battery as Nikon's other full-frame cameras. So this is the big chunky ENEL15. But we've also got something new and unusual in terms of memory, because this camera has got two card slots. One of them is a perfectly normal UHS-2 SD card, but we've also got, probably for the first time on any camera of this type, a micro SD card slot, which you can use for backing up your files. Now, that will probably look like quite a strange choice, because most cameras want to have two fast cards and micro SD is not as quick. But for the type of photographer who's going to be using this camera, it's probably not an issue. They're unlikely to be shooting lots of high-speed bursts, and it just gives them a nice way of backing up all of their photos in a very small form.
And Andy, I'm always going to ask this. Who is this camera made for?
Well, I think you can see by this classic styling that it's really designed for stills photographers primarily, who are nostalgic for those film days, who just want a camera that looks like a stylish classic SLR. It will also be good for creators who want to produce a little bit of video, but it's not necessarily going to be the very best video camera that you can get. So it very much feels like a photographer's camera, very much in keeping with Nikon's heritage.
Well, thank you so much, Andy, for giving us a first look at the new body. If you'd like to read a review about this new camera, please head on over to amateurphotographer.com and you will find all the full details with the specs on the new Nikon Zf. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.